today it's a real pleasure to be here today to share my masterclass with you, and thank you, Sam, for facilitating this for me, because I know obviously this is your program and your platform. So thank you for inviting me here today to share this. As Sam said, my name is Carrie Chappell and I am a mindset and confidence coach. I actually specialise in coaching women, and my specialty is very much corporate wellness. And I would absolutely say that imposter syndrome and taming your inner critic are two of those elements that really come into play a lot when we are in our roles and in our careers. But as you'll also become aware, in other areas of our life as well. So yes, I'm going to share with you my wisdom and understanding of this. I have been in the corporate world myself for 22 years. I've got 3 young children, and I have to say that imposter syndrome and my little inner critic are 2 things that have I've spent a lot of time living with and working with over the years in my different roles and in my parenthood as well. So I'm hoping what I'm going to share with you today are things that they're tools that I've used, and I hope that you will also find them useful, ladies, as well. So that's the nature of the workshop. Just before I go on, I wanted to also share with you a tool that I'm hoping you'll feel comfortable to use. This is called Slido. Now, some of you may or may not be familiar with it. Super simple. If you've got your phone on you and you open the photo app and you just scan the code that you see on my screen now, Slido should launch automatically for you. If you prefer to do it through your browser, you could just type www.slido.com into your browser and you can enter the event code, which you see on my screen, which is #5490504. What this will do is I've got some polls and some questions throughout the workshop, and I'm going to be asking you. You can literally type your responses in on your phone. It comes up totally anonymously. So your answers will come up on the screen for me to see and for everybody else to see, but there'll be no names there. Okay, so I love this tool because it means we can all participate. We can all be a little bit vulnerable, a little bit honest. We can share what's going on for us. And nobody's names are there. So I hope you'll get involved. I hope you'll use that, because I have got some questions for you as we go through, just to hopefully solidify the learning for you. But without further ado, what I'm going to cover today is what imposter syndrome means. I'm going to talk about personality traits that are more susceptible to imposter syndrome. I'm going to talk about how common it actually is. And I'm going to talk about why imposter syndrome does tend to, unfortunately, affect more women than men. And also why, actually, unfortunately, ADHD women are also more susceptible to imposter syndrome. I'm going to talk about what causes it. And then I've got a 6-step process that you can work through to help you overcome it. I'm also going to talk to you about imposter syndrome's what I call terrible twin, which is the inner critic, and how the inner critic and your inner imposter work together, and actually how you can overcome them and champion what we call your inner mentor. And then I'm going to leave you with some techniques that will hopefully help prevent imposter syndrome creeping back in, because every now and again it does. So I hope that works for you all. I have got my chat function open as well, so pop some comments in the chat as we go through if you want to. I'm hoping there'll be a good 5 minutes at the end if there's any kind of burning questions that Sam and I, between us, might be able to answer for you. I've opened up this masterclass with this simple question. What is this self-doubt, anxiety, and deeply uncomfortable thing I am feeling? The Slido number. Okay. Now, let me pop back and see if I can grab that. Just to also let you know, if Slido drops during the presentation, the next time I ask a poll question, the QR code will always be there for you. So you can always reactivate it fairly quickly with every poll that we go through. So not to worry if you have missed it. Let me just go back. Here we are. You've got it? You can find it? Yes, it's 5490504 if you're accessing it through your browser. Otherwise, on your phone, it should come up automatically. Is that all good? Okie doke. So back to this big question. This is what most people and most women who come to me describe imposter syndrome as. They don't necessarily know a name for it. They don't really know what this thing is that they are experiencing, but they know how it makes them feel. And it is self-doubt, it's anxiety, and it's this uncomfortable thing. And when we talk through it all, they start to go, I think that's what I'm experiencing it. And once you're aware of what this is, you can actually start to come to terms with it. You can get your own self-awareness about how it shows up for you, and then you can learn how to tackle it. So I wanted to open with that question, because this for me comes up time and time again when women talk about what they're feeling: anxiety, self-doubt, and just this deeply uncomfortable feeling. So what imposter syndrome is, I'm going to talk you through. There were a couple of psychologists who back in the 90s actually identified it, and they became experts on it. And one was called Pauline Clance, the other one was called Joe Langford. And what they said is that imposter syndrome is the idea that our accomplishments came about not through genuine ability, but as a result of being lucky. And they said that imposter syndrome describes those people who, despite their objective successes, fail to internalize their accomplishments, and they have this persistent self-doubt and even fear of being exposed as a fraud or imposter, and hence the name imposter syndrome. That's where it's come from. So actually, what imposter syndrome is, it's this inability to internalize our accomplishments. It's an inability to believe in one's own competence. And it's this belief that any success we might have had has come about through chance or charm or connections or luck. So nothing that we've done ourselves, but just almost serendipitously that this has happened to us. And actually, one of the most common and interesting things that people talk about when they say that they feel like they have imposter syndrome thoughts and feelings is that when they do experience success, rather than feeling relief, you feel relief rather than having this joy or sense of accomplishment. Rather than thinking, yes, I really nailed that, you think, oh, phew, thank God that's over. Thank God I pulled the wool over somebody else's eyes and I've got through that. So it's this horrible feeling that there's always this kind of like you're winging it. You're never kind of truly owning your successes. And actually, imposter syndrome can be job specific, but it can also extend into other roles in our life, such as parenting or relationships. And I have a number of clients who are constantly worried that their relationship is going to fall apart because they think their partner is going to wake up one day and discover that they're not who they thought they were and that they're going to get dumped. And they have this persistent fear about their own relationship, even when they've been in it for a number of years. Likewise, with parenting, I see this all the time, and I know that I felt this way as well. I'm a mother of twins, and when they were born, I had this constant self-doubt. I'd look around the park, see all these other mothers who seemed to be kind of just getting on with life and coping, and I was there thinking, gosh, I don't deserve this. I don't deserve to have these two babies that I can't look after, and what's going on for me and what's wrong with me. I felt like an imposter in my motherhood. So I can really identify with that. And I think I've felt imposter syndrome in many areas of my life over the years. But the other thing about imposter syndrome is it is most likely to occur when we are going through a time of transition, when we're facing a new challenge or probably entering a new role. And this tends to be work related, or it could be, embracing motherhood. And it's also most likely to occur when we're not representative of our peers or our colleagues, whether that be in education, race, background, diversity, style, many, many different ways. Okay, and I've also got one client who I was working with recently. She joined a creative agency, and she said even then everyone was in suits every day. She was much more kind of quirky in her dress sense. And she said that for the first 3 months, she felt really out of place, even though she fitted in intellectually and creatively. Even her dress sense, she said, drove her sense of imposter syndrome. So it can be all sorts of these little things that really kind of cause it to rear its ugly head. And I wanted to talk about some personality types that are most susceptible to imposter syndrome. And along with Pauline Clance and Joe Langford, there was another fantastic international expert on imposter syndrome called Dr. Val Young. And she talks about 5 different types that are more likely to suffer from imposter syndrome. And that first type is perfectionists. And these people, they're all about how things should be done. They believe that their competence rests on doing things perfectly and never making a mistake. In its most extreme format, they believe I should deliver a perfect performance 100% of the time, and nothing short of perfect is acceptable. And as you can imagine, these people, they will beat themselves up if they don't reach these impossibly high standards. Or it can cause them to actually not take on projects or not take on roles or opportunities or challenges in the first place, because if they don't feel they're going to be able to do it perfectly, which would therefore equate to failure, they would rather not do it at all. Val Young then talks about what she calls the natural genius. And these people are all about intelligence and ability, and they believe their competence rests on this inherent intelligence and ability they have. So they tend to be the bright ones, and they feel like they should be able to master everything immediately because because of their brain power. And if they don't think they're going to be able to, again, they may step away from the project early on, or they might not take it on at all. And then Val talks about the expert. Now, these people are all about knowledge and skills, and they're so focused on their knowledge and their skills and their experience. And unfortunately, they always believe that they never quite have enough. So they're the kind of people who will say, well, before I go for that promotion, I need to have had more experience. Before I go for that interview, I need to have swatted up on everything going on the people who are going to interview. Before I do this, I need more, I need more, I need more qualifications, more experience, more background, etc., etc., etc. Now, what this can also do in the everyday, in our everyday working roles, is it can stop us from speaking up. It can stop us from putting our hand up. It can stop us from putting ourselves forward, because if we don't believe we have the right answer or the best answer, then we would rather not say anything at all. So you can understand why people like this can often get overlooked, because they don't put themselves forward, because they don't think they've got the right information. And on the flip side, if an expert is asked to prepare something or do a presentation, they're probably going to give it 110%. They will definitely over-prepare. They will spend extra hours making sure no stone is unturned in case they get asked a tricky question. So they will really go to the ends of the earth to make sure they've got as much information as possible. And you can imagine how that would be exhausting and potentially lead to burnout and overwhelm if that is a continual cycle that people get stuck in. She then talks about the individualist, and they are all about doing everything alone. And they really feel that if they were competent, they would be able to do everything for themselves. And they see asking for help as a sign that they just don't know what they're doing. Or they believe that they are the only person who can do it right and that they will do it best. So they take everything on themselves and they sacrifice their own personal boundaries to perform what we would consider miracles in many instances. Yes, Sam says, thanks, Carrie. This was me. I was a recovering individualist. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'll come on and talk a little bit about that in a minute. And then finally, Val has got what she calls the superwoman. And superwoman is all about doing everything. So she believes that her competence rests on her ability to juggle multiple roles masterfully. She really thinks if she was competent, that she would be able to do it all. And she's always expecting more of herself. So again, you can imagine how that's an exhausting, difficult way to live, because we'll always fall short. We'll never quite be doing as many things as we need to be doing. And again, it can lead to burnout and overwhelm. So here's my first Slido poll for you ladies. I would love to know if that resonated with you, and if you feel that there's one of those personality traits that you identify with more. And you will note at the bottom, I have got the option to be all of them, because that is another thing that a lot of the ladies tell me. They're like, oh, I'm a bit of this, I'm a bit of that. And I certainly know that I am the expert. Gosh, wow, okay, yeah, brilliant. Got the expert. I know all of them, absolutely. Yes, yes. I'm definitely individualist, superwoman and perfectionist. Not so much the natural genius, but definitely the others. Okay, interesting. 33% of you the expert. Yes, all of them. Brilliant. Okay, thank you for that. Here we are, some more. The individualist, yes. Yes. I normally get a few more perfectionists. I'm all of these, yes. And so is my daughter, yes. And it can be an exhausting way to live, ladies. It can be, can't it? And the thinking, so when I talk about the thinking that drives imposter syndrome, and by the way, I just wanted to caveat, I've shortened imposter syndrome in this presentation to IS, because firstly, it takes a lot of time to write imposter syndrome again and again. And secondly, I don't like to think of it as a syndrome. It makes it sound like it's a little bit of an illness. I prefer to think of it as imposter syndrome thoughts that plague us. So that's another reason why I've put IS. I thought I was a perfectionist, but ADHD keeps me nicely imperfect. Brilliant. Yes, perfectly imperfect. That's what I like to think of. Perfectly imperfect. I want to identify as the perfectionist. Great, thank you, Dominique, thank you. I know I was surprised because I normally get more of the perfectionists coming through than I did in that poll, but all of them is another classic. So imposter syndrome, this can manifest as the outward experience of having it all, but inside there's this kind of rising sense of panic. This is what women tell me. They describe it as this rising sense of panic. And our minds start to whir with thoughts of things like, I'm not good enough to be doing this, or I shouldn't be here. If anyone were to find me out, I'd be a laughing stock. I don't know what I'm doing. I can't do this. Or who am I to do that? What if they realize I'm a fraud? What if they spot that I don't belong here? It's almost like looking over your shoulder the whole time, waiting to be caught out. My next poll, having just shared that with you, ladies, what are the things that your imposter syndrome thoughts tell you? What do they tell you? Mine certainly told me for a long time that I wasn't good enough to be in the role that I was in, that I was winging it, that I was bluffing my way through it, certainly for the first few years. Always felt like I was looking over my shoulder. I'm not qualified. Yes, absolutely. That comes up a lot. I'm not ready yet. Yes, there you are. That's those expert and tendencies coming up. I'm not ready yet. I have to wait till I know more. And this is the thing, we always do this. And my coach, who I trained with, told me that was what she called conditional living, because we're always like, well, when this happens, that'll happen. When this happens, I'll be able to do that. And unfortunately, sometimes when doesn't happen, and we spend our lives waiting for this big eureka moment. I'm going to get in trouble. Yes. I didn't believe in myself. Yes. Yes. My clients would regret working with me. I wonder if that's ever been the case, though. And this is often the debilitating thing about imposter syndrome. It's so often it's up here, and it's actually not a reality. Not a reality. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing that, ladies. More participant typing. I'm not good enough. I don't know enough. Yes. Yes, exactly. Not good enough. I don't know enough. These are the most common thoughts. The others are better than me. That is the classic definition, and I'll come on and talk about that. Thank you, ladies. I think there's one more typing. I'm going to wait and see that comment coming up for you. I don't know enough about this. I'm not prepared. I'll make mistakes. Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is another unfortunate classic syndrome of issue with imposter syndrome, is it causes us to do something called black and white thinking and catastrophizing, where, you know, we're asked to kind of prepare for an interview or something, and we're already in our minds thinking it's all going to go horribly wrong, and that we're going to make mistakes, and that, you know, nothing's going to go our way, and we call this catastrophizing. And that, of course, can drive that stress and that fear and that panic in our head. Yeah, thank you. So this is exactly the challenge. What happens if we suffer from imposter syndrome? We're always more likely to hold back, stay at the back of the room, not speak up, not go after those big opportunities, feel overwhelmed and scared, insecure about our abilities, miss out on earning more money, be overlooked, and never potentially fully develop our full potential. And ultimately, what's happening here is it affects us. Imposter syndrome affects us because we're allowing our value to be determined by what we can do or what we think we can do, rather than actually who we are as individuals. It's about our role. It's about us in our role and what we think we're capable of. And this is why when we're feeling these imposter syndrome thoughts, it can result in perfectionism, 100%, procrastination, not quite being able to get started, people pleasing, and definitely taking on too much. So you can see that in the superwoman and the individualist. And all of this can obviously lead to overwhelm, anxiety, insomnia. Many of my clients tell me they have insomnia. They're already thinking in the night, and they're not sleeping because of what's going to happen, what they have to do the next day. And ultimately and unfortunately, burnout, which is not where any of us want to be. But what you should know about imposter syndrome thoughts and imposter syndrome thinking is it isn't an actual syndrome. It's not a classical illness. Unfortunately, it was just coined that way by Pauline Clance all those years ago. And actually 70% of the population, and I believe this is the UK, have claimed to have experienced it at some point. So it is actually relatively common. And it does occur when we are stepping out of our comfort zone, pushing new boundaries or taking on more challenges. So many people argue there's a certain sense of positiveness to it, because actually we wouldn't feel it if we weren't stepping out of our comfort zone. And this is another reason why high achieving women in particular are very susceptible to it, because we are normally pushing our boundaries and progressing through our career. And that's when it seems to strike us. Hence, it's particularly prevalent amongst high achieving women, but it is also particularly prevalent amongst women with ADHD. And it is normal and it is natural, but it isn't necessarily something that we need to live with. And I just wanted to loop back and explain a little bit about the origins of imposter syndrome and why we feel it in the first place. And a lot of this is down to what I call our childhood conditioning, because up to the age of 7 years old, we are like these little sponges. So we're observing, we're listening, and we're learning, and we're taking on everything that we're experiencing. And it's normally from people in authority to us. So it's normally parents or older siblings or teachers or community leaders. Now, we are too young at this age to really form our own view of the world yet. And we're really not able to interpret the experiences we're having. So when others tell us what it means for us, we take that on to be, right, well, that's what it means. And this is who I am as a person. And this is how I experience life. And in these early years, and they do say, particularly between 0 and 7, we are kind of most susceptible to being these little sponges and forming these views. We form beliefs, and we carry these beliefs around with us into adulthood because they become set. And these are things like beliefs about who we are and what our place is in the world, what we're capable of, what is safe for us, and what we ultimately need to do to ensure love and connection. And love and connection are two of the most fundamental human needs. And then what happens is, as we enter adulthood and maybe we go off to college or we go off to university or our first job positions, we take with us those childhood beliefs and we continue to act in accordance with them. And these are some examples of clients I've worked with over the last 3 years. Obviously, no names here, but they've given me permission to share these scenarios because I think they're particularly useful in understanding how it can manifest in different ways. So I had one client, particularly sadly, who was constantly told she was stupid by her mother when she grew up. She didn't go to university. She didn't do particularly well at school, but she did land herself a fantastic first position with an accountancy firm. But throughout her whole career, she continued to feel inadequate. She was waiting for someone to call her out as stupid. She was waiting to be sacked because she felt like a fraud. She felt like she didn't deserve to be there. She was stupid, so how come she managed to get this role? So again, she felt incredibly inadequate, and then we started working together, but she'd already experienced 6 years of just not feeling good in her job. If we believed that we needed to be loved, we needed to be quiet because we were shh as a child, then we're very unlikely to speak up in the boardroom. And again, this is incredibly common. You hear children being shushed by their parents all the time. And they think, okay, if I'm noisy, I'm going to get shouted at. If I'm quiet, then I'm a good girl and then I might get reward, or I'm not going to irritate my mum and dad. This internal belief is so strong that when we get into a position of authority and we're able to use our voice and we're able to talk, we don't, because actually we equate that as being difficult or naughty, and actually being quiet was being the good girl. I was always told by my mum that self-praise is no praise. That's so interesting. Gosh, isn't it? Yes. And actually the reverse of that is true. I'm so always encouraging my clients to blow their own trumpet and to understand more about how they need to sing their own praises. We need to believe in ourselves as much as we do in other people in order to thrive. It's true that girls are told to behave and be quiet, exactly, and I'll come on and talk a little bit about that in a minute. Again, this is linked to that, Sam. If we were praised for achievements as a child, we may believe that we are only loved if we are praised. Okay, so then we are constantly seeking praise as a validation of our parents' love for us. And we're unlikely to take on in our corporate roles or our careers any task if we don't believe we're going to be able to do it to a standard that's praiseworthy. Because when we translate that love from our parents for praise into the corporate or the working world, that's praise from our boss, that's praise from our team. And if we don't think we're going to be able to do something to a praiseworthy standard, then we don't do it. Yes. And if we believe that if you want something done properly, you have to do it yourself, because that was certainly something bandied around in my household when I was young, then that's when it breeds and turns into either the individualist or the superwoman, where you take everything on in your workplace without question. And I suffered from this for years. I knew I had too much on my plate, but whenever somebody in authority was saying, can anyone else take on another project, in my head I was saying, no, 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 no. And the next thing I knew, my hand was going up, because I just felt this compulsive need to do more, to be the one who was doing it. And of course I can. This is what I was told when I was younger. I can do it. I can do it. And of course that led to my own overwhelm. And this is ultimately, and this was mentioned in one of the comments, this is ultimately where imposter syndrome all starts. It's when the demands of our career force us to step out of our comfort zone, you know, or our beliefs of what is safe for us. And we might believe that others around us who are succeeding are somehow older, wiser, or better than us in some way. School reports show I wasn't trying hard enough, even as a 5-year-old. I mean, yes, that's sad. That's so difficult. And that's where this all starts. It absolutely, that was in your formative years. So yes. So again, question, and I think some of you already started answering this for me in the chat box, but what childhood beliefs drive your imposter syndrome thoughts? What childhood beliefs drive your imposter syndrome thoughts? Mine was definitely, if you want something done properly, do it for yourself. Do it yourself. Even as a really young girl, I was told that by my family. Definitely do it myself. Yes. Yes. That's definitely what leads us to become individualistic and superwoman. And I think that's the challenge. Superwoman used to be a badge of honor, and it isn't anymore. My mother was always horrible to me, really jealous. Yes, I learned to be quiet, to be safe. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, ladies. Thank you. And this leads me very nicely onto my point about imposter syndrome and women, because unfortunately women are more susceptible to imposter syndrome for a number of reasons, and it very much comes down to cultural conditioning. Because, you know, and I'm pleased to say I think this is changing, but some of my clients who are in their, some of them are still in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s even, told me that when they were growing up, when they were really young, particularly the ones in their 40s and 50s, who tend to be in quite senior positions in their roles and are suffering from imposter syndrome thoughts, they were praised as young girls for being sweet, for being kind, for being quiet, for being pretty, for being perfect, rather than necessarily for their efforts or their intelligence, you know. And they were encouraged to take fewer risks. There was this whole idea of praise and perfectionism. They were praised for being pretty, so then they wanted to be perfect and pretty more and more. So then they strove to get affection by being quiet and good and pretty. And the boys were encouraged to go out and climb trees. Young girls were bought dolls, and they were taught how to nurture others. Almost that idea that, you know, we are born to nurture, putting other people ahead of ourselves. And then there is actually a role that our hormones play as well. So when estrogen gets released, particularly if we are pregnant, so that hormone and the role of progesterone as well is actually makes us more risk averse, because our bodies don't want us to be going out and doing dangerous things when we're nurturing a child within us. So again, the hormones that flood through our body on a monthly basis can also keep us safe, keep us small, keep us protected. So unfortunately, there are reasons why women tend to be more susceptible to this. And there was a study done a number of years ago by Hewlett-Packard to figure out the balance of the male to female ratio in the top positions in their companies. And they discovered that women applied far less often, and only when they felt like they fit 100% of the qualifications. But men, on the other hand, applied if they fit 50 to 60% of the qualifications. So actually, women who were overqualified and probably overprepared were still holding back and not putting themselves forward for these roles because they felt they needed to be perfect. And when we think about ADHD, you know, the ADHD brain is prone to self-doubt and rumination. And this is in part due to neurobiology. but it is also in part due to potential negative messaging and reactions that women with ADHD may have experienced in the past. And in a neurotypical brain, when what we call the task positive network, or the TPN, is active and we're working on a task, the default mode network, or the DMN, is turned off. But in the ADHD brain, that DMN remains active. And what this means is that unless we're engaged creatively, or we're in our flow, as it were, we can end up getting into these negative overthinking loops and cycles. And this is because the DMN is the seat of our imagination. It's from where all our creativity is born, but unfortunately also the worries, the self-doubt, the regrets, the assessment of the past, and our concerns about the future. And all of this can keep us stuck even more so in this kind of horrible rumination. So my question for us all to ponder on, and again, this is not a Slido poll, but what if we were to put the same amount of energy into believing in ourselves as we did into criticizing and doubting ourselves? Think about where we might be. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking you through my 6 steps to kind of help overcome imposter syndrome. And my first step is very much about how to explore your own version of imposter syndrome. How does it personally show up for you? So this is just a little bit about self-awareness. Okay, and these are some questions. And again, this is in the workbook that I will be putting into the chat as well. So you've got all of this to work through after the workshop. So don't worry too much about it now. And I know this is being recorded as well, but this is the first step to understanding how imposter syndrome shows up for you. So when was the last time that you felt it? When do you tend to feel it the most? Where were you when you last felt it? And what are you often doing when it occurs? What thoughts are you having? What are you afraid will happen? Who do you tend to be with? What are those physical sensations that you feel, and what are the emotions that accompany that? And as a result, how did you act or react? Did you walk away from a situation? Did you not put yourself forward for an opportunity? What did you do differently or not do because of your imposter syndrome thoughts? So really take some time to work through that for you, so you can understand how it shows up for you. And then you're able to explore, okay, well, what is the impact? What is the personal impact for me of my imposter syndrome thoughts? How has it held me back so far? And are there other times in my life where it has come up? How has it negatively impacted me in my work or my life? How has it held me back from my goals? And where might you be today without your imposter syndrome feelings? And what might you have done by now? What might be different for you? And once you have a look at that, you can then move on and understand the importance, really the personal importance to you of being able to overcome that. So why? Ask yourself, why is it important? Knowing what I know about how it shows up for me, and knowing what potentially I might have missed out on because of it, why is it important to me that I am able to overcome this? What will happen if I do? And equally, what will happen if I don't? And then step 4 is very much about basically exploring more about the truths, the lies of your imposter syndrome. Okay, exploring the lies. And this is the interesting element, because as I said earlier, our brains tend to tell us this awful stuff about what's going to happen. And a lot of the time, it's not even true. So what are those stories? What are those stories that you keep telling yourself or imagining that aren't actually really real, or that you have no proof of? Where do you actually have proof to the contrary of these imposter syndrome thoughts and emotions? So where is that experience? What about those testimonials? What about that praise? What about that training you've had? The awards you might have won? And what can you tell yourself every time you catch your mind telling you a little bit of a lie about your ability, or your talent, or your experience, or your potential? So I've got 6 exercises here that you might want to try. Maybe you can do all of them, or maybe just pick the ones that resonate most with you. The first exercise is simply called Ask 5 People. And it's an exercise when you ask people whose opinion you value and trust. Okay, so this could be a colleague, a friend, a partner, a parent, somebody who you value and trust. And you ask them the following 6 questions. What one word or phrase best describes me? What do you think is my greatest achievement? What do you value most about me? What one thing could I change for my own benefit? What do you believe to be my greatest strength? And when I'm at my best, what do you see me doing? Okay. And then when you get those answers back from them, you can take some time to really reflect, because there will be themes that you notice. And I said, when I do this with my clients, and when I did it for the first time, the same things were coming back and again and again. And actually, a lot of it is going to be really nice, lovely stuff. And you can then take that and go, well, you know what, if 4 out of 5 people are telling me, you know, that they value my friendship and my loyalty and my achievement and my this and my that, then, you know, there's probably some truth in it. And what's equally interesting is when you look at what's the one thing I could change for my benefit, you'll often get people saying the same thing again. And for me, it was things like, you take too much on. You take too much responsibility. You take things to heart too much. Well, again, when lots of people are telling you the same thing, it might be time to take a step back and say, wow, okay, how's that serving me? Is that helping me? Maybe it's time for me to let that go. But basically, what can you take out of this as evidence of your capability, and how can you start to internalize that? The second thing you can do is what I call the achievement timeline exercise. And this is where you simply write up a timeline of your career to date, and you can go all the way back potentially to even your first Saturday job. And I certainly did it with mine. I was a waitress in a pub when I was 17, my first job. And I literally started there and thought, what are all the things that I achieved? What are the skills and the talents, the strengths that I demonstrated along the way, that I picked up, that have really helped me to get to where I am today in my career? And you work all the way through. And I was thinking, wow, okay, well, I learned about multitasking. I learned to have patience. I learned to be good with money. I learned resilience. I learned how to like work hard. You know, I was working till, 1 in the morning. So many things that I picked up that then served me well as I progressed through my career. It's a really nice exercise to do. And I think I sat down for a couple of hours and did it. But again, it'll just help you understand where you are, what your skills and talents are, and the strengths that you personally demonstrated along the way. And a similarly related exercise to that is called Write Your Own Job Reference exercise. And this is really simply where you write it from a third-party perspective, but that you really believe in yourself. So write it as somebody who's really trying to sell you and really hope you're going to get this job. Again, talk about your talents, talk about your skills, your achievement. Why would you be the absolute best woman for this job? And it's hard for us to do these things because we're not used to celebrating our own successes. We're not used to blowing our own trumpet, but it is so important that we do that, because that really helps to start combat this inner critic, this inner imposter that really starts to rear its head every now and again. And actually, neuroscience is proving that we can rewire the neurons in our brain for much more ongoing positivity if we are able to really own our successes. And then I would suggest to my clients all the time that they do exercise number 4, regardless of the other exercises they pick, because this is about keeping a log of all your ongoing everyday achievements. Okay. And what you do, one client of mine who does this calls it her little book of brilliance, and she keeps it in the top drawer of her desk. Every single day, when you have achieved something big or small, a little win, a little success, write it down. Write it down, because again, our brains, we've got this thing in our brains called negativity bias. We tend to look for the bad stuff that happens. We'll remember the interview that didn't go well. We'll remember the meeting we messed up in. We'll remember the presentation that didn't work properly. We won't remember all those other amazing little things where we really did win. Write them down. Imagine after a month looking back on that. Imagine after 6 months, a year, 5 years, all of those everyday little wins. Okay, they really help you look back with a sense of pride, and they also help you understand what you like doing, what your skills are, what lights you up. And it's not about waiting for others to acknowledge you. It's not about waiting till your boss walks over to your desk and says, well done you. If you intrinsically know, I did a really good job then, write it down. And one of the best things about this exercise is when we are writing about the positive things that we've done, our body actually does release endorphins, and that can actually help reinforce more of a feeling of competence. Now, I can't see the chat function. It's slightly disabled, so I'm just going to check it in case there's anything I'm missing. Yeah, no, all good. Lovely. Okay, so I hope this is making sense to everybody. Number 5, mantras. Okay. Now, again, this is coming back to that neuroscience about rewiring the neurons in our brain and programming ourselves for more ongoing positive thinking. Write down some empowering mantras, things. So, for example, one of my clients, she's absolutely brilliant with Excel. She's like, I'm an Excel whiz, and people come to me for my Excel knowledge. So she reminds herself of that every day when she's feeling a bit kind of on edge about things. She's like, but I'm amazing at Excel. I'm a brilliant client services director. I love public speaking. All the things that she's good at, she writes them down. I am a brilliant whatever. And some of my clients will even, they'll put it on post-it notes on their mirrors in their bathroom. They might even put it on as a screensaver on their phone or their laptop, so that every time they access their phone, boom, they're looking at that positive mantra right in their face, and it's reminding them of the things that they are really good at. Okay, because this is coming through in neuroscience to say that it's a really, really strong positive thing for us to be doing. And then finally, I talk about changing your inner voice. And what I mean by this is start speaking differently to and about yourself. And I'll come on and talk a little bit more about the inner critic, but rather than allowing that critical voice to win, remind yourself, what are my greatest achievements? What are my greatest strengths? Because I'm genuinely surprised when I speak to clients, when I ask them this question, they cannot think of anything. And sometimes it takes us a good half an hour in a coaching session to get anything out of them that they think is an achievement or a strength. And we really need to be focused much more on that, because again, it resets us, it helps us think more positively, and it helps us have a better balanced view of who we are as people and individuals. And then step 5 is actually acknowledging where there are a few little uncomfortable truths potentially about our imposter syndrome. Okay, and this is very simply looking at what is actually true about our fears, because sometimes we do have shortcomings, we have knowledge gaps, and they unfortunately can contribute or exacerbate our imposter syndrome feelings. So my question to you is, where might you be stressfully winging it, as I call it? Because I know that I was doing that a lot of my early career. Where are you winging it instead of making the time to gain that real confidence by gradually filling in your knowledge gaps? What are those criticisms you're afraid of hearing because there's a bit of truth about them? Because sometimes that's what it is. It's a knowledge gap. And we need to think about, where can we go to for support to fill these knowledge gaps? Do we need to ask for more training? Do we need to do another course? Sometimes it's as simple as improving our delegation skills, because we might be trying to do something that somebody else could do better. And again, let's just check ourselves and make sure it's not that individualist or that superwoman coming out to play here. And step 6 is then creating your new story. And this is ultimately the most important step. And again, this is in your workbook. And the question to ask yourself here is, if you knew you were the right person for the job, despite any shortcomings or knowledge gaps you've got, if you loved and approved of yourself right now, you had no imposter syndrome, no self-doubt, no rumination, no worrying about what others thought, what would you do? Or what would you do differently? How would you show up? How would you walk? How would you stand? How would you dress? Really get into this. What would you believe is true or possible for yourself? What would you say to and about yourself? And then actually, what action steps would you take to address those knowledge or capability gaps? And on that note, I've got another Slido poll. And I'd love if anyone felt they wanted to share, what would you do or do differently if you didn't have any of those imposter syndrome thoughts, any self-doubt, any criticism? What would you do? I know when I look back on it, when I did this exercise 5 years ago, gosh, there were at least two jobs that I never went for because I didn't believe enough in myself. And I think to myself, gosh, imagine where my career would be now if I'd have actually had the courage to walk into that interview room. Go for my next job, absolutely. Put myself out there for opportunities I'd been avoiding for a while. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. And this is the problem. We often get stuck in our roles because it feels comfortable. We're in our comfort zone. Don't want to push ourselves out there for fear of all the things that could possibly go wrong. Yes. So I see another couple of people typing, so I'll just wait to see what comes through from that. Been avoiding for a while, yes. And I would encourage all of you ladies after this workshop to really put some time aside, if you can, to work through the exercises in the worksheet. Accept more invitations to do podcasts. Brilliant. Yes. Feel less stressed. Let myself down when I start talking. Yes. And again, you know what? That's because we're probably getting into that kind of rumination and stress state, whereas actually we just need to calm down and be like, I've got this. I've got this. No, I can balance work and motherhood. Absolutely. That's such a challenge. That's such a common thought process. Thank you. Thank you, ladies. Stop hesitating. Yes. Right. And now I'm going to talk to you about what I call taming the terrible twins. And they're not my children, but your inner critic and your inner imposter, because they are related. And I will explain that. So your inner critic, it's that voice in your head that tells you all the bad stuff about who you are and what you can achieve or not achieve, as the case may be. It rains on your parade. It stamps all over your most exciting dreams. It's the secret reason why we say no when our hearts are silently screaming yes. But our inner critic actually does have our best interests at heart. Its biggest job is to actually protect us. And deep down, all that mind chatter, all that rumination, all that stress and anxiety is because there's a part of us that's secretly scared. And our inner critic wants to keep us safe. Again, this comes back to the poll just now about not stepping out of our comfort zone, not putting ourselves forward. And actually, the actions we take depend on which voice wins. Do we give in to the voice of our imposter? Do we give in to the voice of our critic? Or do we listen to the more reasoned voice of our inner mentor? And I'll come on and talk about that in a second. Because one of our inner critic's mantras is that safe is small and growth is scary. And our inner critic, I say, normally hangs out in the zone of our thoughts and our actions. It's kind of keeping us in check, making sure we're not taking risks that it might not approve of, sticking our head above the parapet where the wild things are. You know, when it comes to imposter syndrome, this is the interesting distinction. You're no longer necessarily just looking at thoughts and actions, because it's about who you believe you are and what you're capable of. It comes back to what I was saying about, you know, at the age of 0 to 7, if we, you know, if people like us don't go to university because that's what mum and dad said, then we're never going to believe that we're the kind of people who are going to go off and get that job in the law firm. Do you see what I mean? It's about these identities that we take on. I couldn't possibly do that because I'm this, that, and the other, or we don't do that, or my family, you know, and I, you know, we didn't go to university, so that's not an opportunity available to us. Okay, it's all this kind of thinking that we take on and forms our identity. And there's a great coach that I did a course with last year called Claire Joso, and she said imposter syndrome is basically your inner critic on steroids. So they do feed each other. They feed each other. And your inner critic, as I said, has the thinking capabilities of a child, because this is when it first came into existence. It's that 0 to 7 years when we're forming our ideas and our beliefs. And it does love to pipe up. It comes up, you know, especially when we're in these challenging situations. And like I said, if you listen, you'll probably hear it giving a commentary, a running commentary on everything you say and do. And it's chipping in with what I would describe as hurtful and a destructive narrative. And actually, it's really important that we understand that the person who has the most capacity to hurt us at this stage in our lives is ourselves, because we are giving our inner critic and our inner imposter all the power by succumbing to this catastrophizing and stressful self-doubt and anxious thinking. Yes, yes, absolutely. And you know, this is the other thing I would say. Some people have an inner critic voice, and some of us have the voice of lots of people in our lives. And when I trained, I had trained with an American coach, and she called it the itty bitty shitty committee, that kind of sits on your shoulder like this, maybe both your shoulders, and it might be a little bit of your mum, and it might be the professor you had, or it might be, you know, an ex-partner, whatever it is. It's this itty bitty shitty committee that sits on your shoulder, pouring this poison into your ear about your work ethic or your parenting style or your choice of friends or your ability or your looks, all this stuff. And actually, again, looking into this research, Dr. Hallowell, which is many of you may be familiar with, has done a lot of work around ADHD. And in an interview that he did in 2021, he was talking to women and girls about this, and the research has shown that the ADHD brain seeks stimulation all the time, and actually this idea of contentment is too bland, and actually it's all too easy for people with ADHD to charge their brain, as it were, and stimulate it through negative talk and despair. And actually that's often why the ADHD brain is more likely to listen to its inner critic, unfortunately. So what I wanted to say to you is, learn from your inner critic and your inner imposter. Notice when it's talking to you. How can you recognize their voices? What are they saying to you? Are they saying anything that's useful or kind or moving you towards achieving your goals? Or are they keeping you stuck in procrastination and self-sabotage and fear? Because if they're not helping you move forward, then you need to start to work a little harder to listen and appreciate your inner mentor. Because often our inner critic will be feeding us stuff that isn't true. And if it's not true, then it's pure self-doubt and there's no justification for it. It's a waste of your creative time and energy to focus on it. And if there is some truth in it, coming back to point 5 in overcoming imposter syndrome, what can we learn from it? What can we change? What can we practice that little bit more? And how does listening to your inner critic hold you back from living the life you want? And this is an exercise I do with my clients. If you gave your inner critic or your inner imposter a voice of their own, what would they sound like? Would they be booming like a headmistress or squeaky like a little mouse? What would they be like? What would sum up their personalities? If you gave them a physical form, what would they look like? Would they be a creature, a person, an object? It helps to give your inner critic or your inner imposter a name. So for example, it could be Doubting Debbie or Worrying Wanda or Ruminating Rita. Or in my case, it was Debilitating Dina when I first named her 4 years ago, because she would utterly debilitate me when she came into play. Whatever resonates with you, make it a name that makes it sound less scary. And then when you can hear their voice, you're then able to say, oh, that's just Ruminating Rita again, or that's just Worrying Wanda again, okay? It helps to kind of separate. There's some psychological distance between you and this inner critic and inner imposter, so it doesn't feel so caught up in your brain. And encourage your inner mentor. So can you identify the voice of your inner mentor? Your inner mentor is the voice that's much more objective. It's the voice that can help us improve and grow. It's probably the voice that goes, you know what? Yes, you're not that brilliant at presentations. Let's get ourselves onto a presentation course, because actually, we're going to be really good at this. So it's that voice that can kind of really help you grow and is much more objective. Learn to distinguish between the two. What's your inner mentor telling you? What are the strengths and skills and achievements and successes? Again, if you've done those exercises that I talked about in step 4, some of this will start to come and feel a bit more natural for you. And how can you support your inner mentor to learn and take steps to grow and really champion her voice talking in your ear rather than your critic and imposter? Notice their different voices. If you've named your inner critic and your inner imposter and you know what they look like and sound like, it can kind of help separate them from the rest of your thoughts and recognize that things that they say to you are not necessarily true. They're just that part of your brain that was developed when you were young and when things felt scary, coming back to those formative years, probably not serving you so well now. And an important thing to do is practice what we call non-attachment. So this is the idea that feelings aren't facts. And when we know what imposter syndrome thoughts are and we can recognize them creeping up on us, we can acknowledge that they're making us feel anxious and making us feel self-doubt. We can slow down our thoughts and acknowledge this is an imposter thought. Okay, I get this now. I know what's happening to me. And it can really help if you put a hand on your heart and another one on your belly and you take some deep breaths in through your nose, out through your mouth, because this in the moment will help you reset your nervous system. And once you've acknowledged these imposter syndrome thoughts, you can then slightly more easily set them aside and appeal to the more logical part of your brain to make a much more conscious and controlled and informed choice of how you would want to think and act differently. So that's when we champion the inner mentor coming through. That's when we remind ourselves of all the reasons why we are in the role. We know that that's an old pattern of thinking. We're actually creating a new one now. If you think about your new story that you're creating, and I would encourage you to go through that exercise to really solidify that in your head. Remember the reasons why you're in your role or you're doing the project or the task. And some of my clients say it helps to address their inner imposter with a very calming mantra, something like, I hear you, and I know you're trying to protect me, but I don't need you anymore. And if you feel yourself sinking into this self-doubt and anxiety, there are some physical activities that you can do that will help get you into your flow. So these are just some examples. I'm sure you guys have got others, and I'll ask you what they are. But basically, this will increase your heart rate, and they can give you that dopamine boost that you need in that moment. So do anything, but don't feed the rumination and the stress and the anxiety and the doubt with your attention. Don't give it your attention. Go dancing, do yoga, walk in nature, go boxing, cooking, baking, listening to music, conversation. All of these things can really get you out of that cycle of rumination and get you more focused and get your logical brain back in gear and help you make informed, positive choices on how to move forward. And I'd love to know if there are activities that help pluck you out of rumination and get you back into control. Has anyone got anything that works for them? I actually find, particularly now that I'm working from home, just going next door and spending some time with my children actually does really help. Walking the dog, absolutely. That's why I want a dog. Yes. Walking the dog somewhere nice outside, absolutely. Going out in nature as well. Beach walk, hugging and cuddling my kids. Yes, yes. And again, stroking dogs and hugging other people is another way of helping release endorphins into our body, which is also known as the cuddle hormone, because it does facilitate this kinship and bonding. So those are great things to do. Thank you for sharing those. Dismiss your inner critic from duty. Okay, so when you're ready and when you've gone through that process and you've named her and you've personified her, you might say something like, okay, that's worrying Wanda, or that's ruminating Rita. She's babbling away again. Thank you, I've got this. I don't need your help. Okay, so this is quite a playful way of kind of just stopping those thoughts in their track, turning that volume right down. Okay, create that psychological distance. You can write her a letter if it helps. And again, I wanted to show you this letter that one of my clients wrote last year to her inner imposter. She called her Poisonous Patty. And the reason for that was that when she was younger, she lived next door to a really annoying lady called Patty, who was always complaining about the noise they made in their back garden. So she never liked the name Patty. She called her Poisonous because she said in her mind, when she was thinking about who this inner critic and imposter was, it was this snake, like this serpent that curled itself around her neck and was like whispering all this bad stuff into her ear. So she wrote a letter that dismissed her from duty. I won't read it all out to you, but it's here for you to see. But, you know, she said things like, I realize you've been a part of my life. You've been trying to keep me safe, but you've held me back for such a long time. I've been listening to you. You've had control over me, but you've restricted me from living my life to its fullest potential. You've created obstacles when it comes to work and setting up a new career. You know, and then she goes on to say, the new upgraded version of me won't be looking back and you won't be missed. I refuse to doubt myself continuously over and over again. I've criticized myself, wearing away at my self-worth. This is now my time to blossom and grow, and be the version of me that I know I can be. Okay. So she said that she found that a really cathartic exercise to do, to really kind of name it. She keeps the letter in her top drawer and every now and again she gets it out to read it again, but really kind of creates that distance and moves forward in a more positive way. Does anybody have an idea of what their inner critic or their inner imposter would look like? And any names they might give them? Mine was definitely debilitating, Dina, because for me, it felt like, from my own experience of it was debilitating. I literally was often rooted to the spot, panicking. Really stressed me out. Some people call it things like, what have I heard? I've heard Angelica from the Rugrats. I've heard people calling it Darth Vader. I've heard people calling it all sorts of things. It's whatever that image is that gets conjured up in your mind of that potential negative aspect of something. Maybe everyone needs a little bit of time to think about that one. Again, it's in the exercise, but critical Nancy, yes. Yes. Thank you. Absolutely. So then you can work on personifying her a little bit more and kind of what she looks like, what she sounds like. Mirror. Yes. Yes, that's a really interesting one. Thank you. So I encourage you all to have a look at that and see what you can think. And then what I would kind of finally say, coming to a close, I think, is check your facts always. So when you're having this emotional spiral of imposter syndrome thinking, ask yourself the following: is this thought 100% true? Is it fact, or is there some opinion or belief, or am I mind reading here? Am I mind reading something that isn't really going on? Is paying attention to this thought helpful, useful, or supportive to myself and or my team in completing what we need to do? Is it necessary for me to focus on and act on this debilitating thought right now? Does it inspire me? Does it motivate me? Or does it actually have the opposite effect? And is it a kind thought? And if it's not, what would be a kinder, more supportive thought to have right now? And if you're really spiraling, get out there and do something from that kind of flow list that gets you out of that rumination, gets you out of your head and into a better space. And another thing that some of my clients, an exercise I will do with them, is just called alternative perspective. So when you're having this thinking and these thoughts, there are 4 questions that can help you, prompt you to look at it differently. One is, how would my best friend or someone who is competent respond? If I knew everything would work out, how would my view change? When have I handled something like this before, and what did I do about it? And actually, what thoughts would get me closer to successfully completing this project, task, or responsibility? And finally, I would say, really important is to protect your free time, because this is another thing that people with imposter syndrome thoughts tend to not be so good at. And again, this could be because it's that superwoman and that individualistic person coming up in us, but we tend to often hop from project to project. Sometimes it's in an attempt to keep busy, sometimes it's in an attempt to prove ourselves, and sometimes it's because we are genuinely over delivering, because it's that kind of the expert in us wanting to know everything and wanting to have left no stone unturned. And this is where we can get into burnout and stress and overwhelm and anxiety. And actually, I'm sure you all know this, if we're not looking after ourselves, that rumination, that anxiety can be 10 times worse. So recognize when you need to nourish and nurture yourself around your commitments. When we're recharged, we can flow much more easily from one area of our life to the other. So think about what helps you recharge. What helps you recharge? Build that into your schedule and make it a non-negotiable. Has anybody got any favorite go-to self-care activities that they wanted to share? Anyone got some favorites? Mine's definitely the Friday night Himalayan pink salt bubble bath. Don't do it every Friday, but when I can, I love it. It's, for me, that's a signal that it's the end of the week and I can luxuriate. Hot yoga, yes. Oh gosh, I love that. I haven't done that in so long. They've shut the studio down near me. I'd like to do that. Do you know, bathroom, I'm thinking of creating a sensory space in our house. Brilliant. Love that. Yes. Thank you, ladies. Okay. So, mental checklist for you to end on. Slightly not keeping up. Oh, sorry. Most important questions to ask yourself is, why feel bad? Why allow yourself and succumb to the bad feelings? What's the benefit and value to those around me and to myself of feeling bad? Why would I take something forward with me that makes my journey through life harder and heavier? Become aware of your thoughts. Does this thought hurt me, harm me, or help me? Because no thought is neutral. This is the interesting thing about thoughts. Every thought kind of either moves us forward or it harms us in some way. And we need to choose to let go of the hurtful ones and support the positive ones, the helpful ones. Ask yourself, how is this going to work out the best for me? And how can I make that happen? And what support do I need to make that happen? And if we have had a bad experience or a negative thought or feeling or something go wrong for us, what have we learned from it? What would be helpful in the future? And as I say to my clients, leave the rest of the baggage behind. Quieten your inner critic, who in turn will calm your inner imposter, and really encourage your inner mentor. And the parting question I would leave with you is, who would you be without your imposter syndrome? Thank you, ladies. I'm conscious I've run a couple of minutes over, but if anyone has any parting thoughts or comments, then I would welcome that. But thank you so much. I hope that's been helpful. We will share the worksheet that you can work through those with, and I hope that it helps.
Thank you so much, Carrie. That was really good. Just resonated with so much of it. And I'm sure everyone did as well. And I sent the worksheet out already to everyone.
Fabulous. Thank you. You did. Yes, I remember you saying you do that. Brilliant.
Yeah. Someone's saying, is it possible to get a copy of the slideshow? Yes. Yeah. I'll send the recording out after the workshop. Yeah, it's really helpful. I think also for ourselves as well as parents as well, because we are raising the next generation of jobs.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, everybody. I hope that's been a valuable hour, and appreciate you taking your early lunch break with me on a busy Tuesday. But yes, you've got the handout, you've got the recording, so hopefully these are tools you can come back to and really kind of develop and hone and become much more aware of listening to the positive voices there. Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie.
Thanks, Sam. Thank you, everybody. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your week.